October 15, 1944, 26,000 feet above the jagged, snow-dusted peaks of the Cologne countryside, the cabin of the B-17G Flying Fortress, christened Lovely Julie Zalamos, is a symphony of industrial violence. The four Wright Cyclone engines are a synchronized roar, vibrating through the boots of the 10 men aboard. Outside, the air is a lethal 50 taxi. Inside, the crew breathes bottled oxygen, their faces masked, their eyes scanning the thin blue ether for the Abbeville boys or any other Luftwaffe squadron looking to tear a hole in the formation. First Lieutenant Lawrence Larry Delancey grips the yoke with gloved hands. Beside him, co-pilot Second Lieutenant Raymond Ledoux checks the manifold pressure. They are part of the 300th bomb group, a silver tide of aluminum stretching across the horizon, bound for the marshalling yards of Cologne. Flak ahead, a voice crackles over the interphone. It's the navigator, Second Lieutenant Ernest Anderson, perched in the plexiglass nose of the bomber. From his vantage point, the world is a panoramic map of occupied Europe. The first bursts appear as innocent puffs of black cotton candy. Then comes the crump, the physical jolt of high explosive shells detonating close enough to rattle the teeth. The German flag gunners on the ground have the range. They are walking the fire toward the lead combat box. Keep it steady, Larry Ledoux mutters. In a B-17, the pilot is a bus driver in a shooting gallery. You don't dodge, you hold the line so the bombardier can do his job. In the nose, Anderson and the bombardier, Sergeant George Abbott, are surrounded by maps, the Norden bomb site, and the biting chill of the high-altitude wind whistling through small gaps in the airframe. They have no idea that in 3 seconds, the front of their world is going to vanish, that there is no whistle of a falling shell. There is only a blinding flash of orange and a sound like a freight train hitting a brick wall, a direct hit. An 88mm flak shell, fuzzed for altitude, punches through the plexiglass nose of Lovely Julie and detonates instantly. In the cockpit, Delancey is slammed back into his seat. The aircraft lurches violently upward as if grabbed by a giant hand before plunging into a sickening dive. The windshields are instantly coated in a horrific slurry of hydraulic fluid, oil, and debris, but it's the sound that haunts him. The roar of the engines is gone, replaced by a terrifying, high-pitched scream of rushing air that Delancey wipes a hand across his goggles. He looks forward, expecting to see the instrument panel and the back of the navigator's compartment. Instead, he sees the open sky. The entire nose of the B-17, everything forward of the cockpit bulkhead is gone. The navigator, the bombardier, the bomb sight, and the very floorboards have been obliterated. Where a moment ago there was a pressurized compartment and 2 comrades, there is now a jagged, gaping maw of twisted metal opening into a $300 tax gale. Status, give me a status. Delancey screams into the throat, mic dot silence. The interphone system is dead. The wires were severed when the nose was sheared off, but the B-17 is now an aerodynamic nightmare. With the nose gone, the aircraft has become a massive hollow whistle. The wind rushing into the fuselage creates a terrifying ram air effect, threatening to inflate the plane from the inside out and rip the wings from the fuselage. Delancey fights the yoke, but it's gone limp. The control cables for the elevators and rudder, which run along the sides of the fuselage, have been shredded. The bomber is falling out of formation, drifting into the dead zone where lone stragglers are picked off by German fighters like wounded gazelles behind him. In the top turret, the gunner looks down and sees nothing but blue sky where the cockpit floor should meet the nose. He sees Delancey and Ledoux sitting on the edge of a precipice, their flight boots dangling over a 2-mile drop, and that the flying fortress has become a flying convertible, and the clock is ticking on their survival. Section 2. Hanging over the abyss. The cockpit is no longer a sanctuary of dials and glass. It is a wind tunnel of pure Arctic chaos. The slipstream, traveling at over 300 hours text to HC, hammers into the flight deck with the force of a physical blow. Maps, checklists, and loose equipment are sucked instantly into the void where the nose used to be, vanishing into the clouds below. First Lieutenant Larry Delancey feels the control yoke go slack in his hands, a pilot's worst nightmare. The 88mm shell hadn't just removed the nose, it had shredded the main control cables that linked the cockpit to the tail surfaces. The Lovely Julie begins a sickening slow-motion roll to the left, her heavy wings protesting the sudden aerodynamic imbalance. Ray, the cables! Delancey yells, though his voice is instantly snatched away by the roar. He doesn't need to say it. Ledoux is already looking down between their seats where the floorboards have been peeled back like a sardine can. The severed ends of the elevator cables are whipping violently in the wind. If they lose pitch control, the B-17 will either lawn dart into the German soil or stall and spin until the centrifugal force rips the airframe apart. In an act of desperation born of pure adrenaline, Ledoux leans forward. He is strapped into his seat, but his upper body is hanging over a 5-mile drop. He reaches into the frozen vortex and grabs the jagged, frayed ends of the steel cables. The metal burrs slice through his flight gloves, drawing blood that freezes almost instantly in the 50 circ text on or he pulls. Hard, to the bomber's nose, or what's left of it sluggishly heaves upward. By manually tensioning the cables with his bare strength, Ledoux is acting as the aircraft's mechanical linkage. He is no longer just a co-pilot pilot, he is the literal nervous system of the B-17. "I've got her!" Ledoux screams, his face turning a ghostly shade of blue as the oxygen mask struggles to deliver a steady flow in the turbulent air, but the danger is internal as well. With the nose gone, the B-17 is behaving like a giant scoop. The air pressure building up inside the fuselage is immense, puts agonizing stress on the bulkheads and the waist gunner's windows. Behind them in the radio room and the waist, the rest of the crew is paralyzed by the sudden change in pressure. Their ears pop painfully and the temperature drops 40 degrees in seconds, and the awed technical Sergeant Abbott, the bombardier who had been in the nose seconds before the blast, is nowhere. Delancey looks down into the hollowed-out cavity. He expects to see the remains of his friends. Instead, he sees a miracle of the grimmest sort. The navigator Anderson is slumped against the side of the remaining fuselage, miraculously still inside the plane, held in by a tangled web of wiring and a single structural rib. But George Abbott, the bombardier, is gone. The spot where he stood with the Nordenbaum site is simply empty air. Suddenly, a hand reaches up from the jagged edge of the floor. Then another Abbott hadn't been blown out clear. The explosion had tossed him into the narrow walkway below the cockpit, and he was now dangling over the Cologne suburbs, his fingers locked onto a piece of bent aluminum. The wind is trying to peel him off the airframe like a scab. Abbott, Ledoux bellows, unable to let go of the control cables to help Delancey, keeps his left hand on the yoke, fighting the ailerons to keep the wings level, while his right hand reaches down to grab Abbott's flight suit. The wind is screaming, a demonic howl that vibrates through the very marrow of their bones. The B-17 is vibrating so violently that the instrument needles are blurred. Unreadable ghost.Balikat, they are falling out of the formation. The combat box, so their only protection against the Luftwaffe, is pulling away. To the German pilots circling above, the lovely Julie looks like a carcass ready for the picking. A B-17 with no nose, trailing smoke and debris, dropping behind the pack. "We have to dive," Delancey realizes. If they stay at this altitude, they'll freeze or be shot down. But a dive with no nose section could catch the wind and snap the plane in half. It is a gamble with 10 lives on the line. Delancey looks at Ledoux, whose hands are bleeding and locked onto the cables. He looks at the empty space where the horizon should be framed by glass. "Hold on!" Delancey yells. He pushes the nose down. Bigilick the lawn adder. A hand reaches up from the jagged edge of the floor. Then another Abbott hadn't been blown out clear. The explosion had tossed him into the narrow walkway below the cockpit, and he was now dangling over the Cologne suburbs, his fingers locked onto a piece of bent aluminum. The wind is trying to peel him off the airframe like a scab. Abbott, Ledoux bellows, unable to let go of the control cables to help Delancey, keeps his left hand on the yoke, fighting the ailerons to keep the wings level, while his right hand reaches down to grab Abbott's flight suit. The wind is screaming, a demonic howl that vibrates through the very marrow of their bones. The B-17 is vibrating so violently that the instrument needles are blurred. Unreadable ghost.Bigilick to the lawn adder. Reporting it to the celebrated B.
The hurricane within.
The altimeter needle spins in a frantic, counterclockwise blur. 24,000 feet, 22,000, 19,000. As the lovely Julie plunges, the air thickens, but the violence only intensifies. The slipstream hitting the jagged remnants of the nose creates a chaotic buffeting effect that threatens to shake the rivets straight out of the wing spars. In the cockpit, Delancey and Ledoux are being hammered by a physical wall of wind. It's not just cold anymore. It's a blunt instrument. Ledoux's arms are shaking, the muscles screaming, as he maintains the tension on the severed elevator cables. Every time the tail surfaces catch a pocket of turbulent air, the steel lines jerk in his hands, threatening to snap his wrists. Below him, Sergeant Abbott, the bombardier who had been dangling over the abyss, is hauled upward by the collective strength of the crew. His flight suit is shredded, his face a mask of frostbite and shock, but he is back inside the safety of the hollowed-out fuselage. "Sauber Shingle," Delancey yells, looking back. Ernest Anderson, the navigator, is a ghost. He is slumped against the remains of the left side bulkhead, his heated suit disconnected, and his oxygen mask dangling. He's alive, but the blast that took the nose has left him dazed, bleeding from the ears, and staring into the rushing sky with wide, unseeing eyes.
Get into the back.
Delancey commands the top turret gunner, who has climbed down from his perch.
And get some blankets over that hole.
It's a futile order. There isn't enough canvas in the world to plug the gaping maw where the nose used to be. The wind is swirling inside the cabin in a localized cyclone, picking up spent shell casings, stray ammunition links, and blood, whipping them into a deadly slurry that blinds the pilots. Suddenly, the waist gunner's voice cracks over what's left of the short-range radio. And it's 6 o'clock high. They're coming down for the kill. A pair of Focke-Wulf 9Ts have spotted the cripple. To the German pilots, the B-17 looks like a flying wreck, a confirmed kill just waiting for the final burst of 20-millimeter cannon fire. They dive out of the sun, the radial engines screaming as they close the gap. Engines 3 and 4 are over-revving. Ledoux shouts over the wind. The damage to the nose has disrupted the airflow into the engine intakes on the starboard side. The propellers are runaway, spinning faster than the governor can control, threatening to disintegrate and send shards of steel through the fuel tanks. Delancey is trapped in a pilot's purgatory. If he levels out to save the engines, the FW-190s will tear them to pieces. If he stays in the dive, the plane might shatter from the aerodynamic stress.
Tail gunner, off to me. Delancey Meadows!
They're closing 800 yards. 600 Meffy gunners, twin 50 calibers, begin to bark. Aboard the Frantic, 600 Meffy.
The tail gunners, twin 40 calibers.
Delancey makes a split-second decision. He can't outrun them, and he can't outturn them. He has to out-tough them.
Give me everything you've got on those cables. We're leveling off.
As Ledoux heaves back with every ounce of his remaining strength, Delancey fights the ailerons. The lovely Julie groans, a sound of tortured metal that mimics a human scream. The nose, or the jagged ring of metal where the nose used to be, slowly rises toward the horizon. The FW-190s open fire. Tracers streak past the cockpit windows like glowing green hornets. One shell punches through the vertical stabilizer, another clips the number 2 engine, sending a spray of oil across the wing. But the B-17 is a fortress for a reason. The waist gunners and the ball turret gunner open up, creating a wall of lead that forces the German pilots to break their strafing run. They hadn't expected the dead bomber to fight back with such velocity. As the fighters peel away for another pass, Delancey looks at his instrument panel. It's a graveyard of shattered glass. The magnetic compass is spinning uselessly. The radio is a tangle of wires. They are deep in enemy territory, flying a plane that shouldn't be airborne, with no navigation and a crew on the brink of collapse. Where are we, Ernest? Delancey asks, looking back at the navigator. Anderson looks at the empty sky, where his maps used to be. He looks at the gaping hole in the front of the plane. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, handheld emergency compass, the only tool he has left. West, Anderson rasps, his voice barely audible over the roar. Just keep flying west until we see the channel, or until we fall out of the sky. A 10-minute purgatory. The flight deck of lovely Julie is a theater of the surreal. At 15,000 feet, the air is thick enough to breathe, but heavy enough to hammer. The 10-minute miracle has begun, a stretch of time that will feel like a lifetime for the 10 men aboard. Every second is a battle against physics. Without the aerodynamic cone of the nose, the B-17 is fighting a massive amount of drag. The aircraft wants to pitch up violently as the wind hits the cockpit bulkhead, and it takes the combined strength of Delancey on the yoke and Ledoux on the severed cables to keep the horizon level. I can't hold it much longer. Ledoux grunts, his teeth bared in a grimace of agony. His hands, slick with a mixture of hydraulic fluid and his own blood, are starting to go numb from the freezing slipstream. If he lets go of those cables for even a second, the elevator will flap uselessly, and the bomber will perform a fatal backflip. You have to, Ray.
The Delancey screams over the $250 text MBO. Think of the boys in the back.
We're not dying over Germany. In the waist, the gunners are performing their own brand of triage. They've dragged the navigator, Anderson, and the bombardier, Abbott, toward the radio room, the most protected part of the shattered fuselage. They use flight jackets and spare parachutes to try and create a windbreak against the freezing air screaming through the empty nose. But it's like trying to stop a flood with a screen door suddenly, the number 3 engine cough. A plume of black smoke erupts from the cowling. Oil pressure's bottoming out on 3. Delancey yells, feather it now. Ledoux reaches for the feathering button with one hand while keeping the other locked onto the control cables. It's a feat of terrifying coordination. The propeller slows, the blades turning edge on to the wind to reduce drag, but the loss of power causes the B-17 to yaw dangerously to the right.
Now, they are flying a 3-engined, noseless wreck through a sky crawling with enemies.
Fighters coming back, 11 o'clock high.
The top turret gunner shouts.
The 2 Focke-Wulfs have circled back, sensing the fortress is finally losing its grip on the sky. They dive in for a head-on pass, the most lethal maneuver in aerial combat. Usually a B-17 would meet this with its nose-mounted 50-caliber machine guns, but there is no nose. There are no guns. There is only an open, yawning hole. They're coming straight into the cockpit. Abbott screams from the floor. Delancey watches as the FW-190s grow from specks to snarling monsters, their wing roots flickering with the orange light of cannon fire. He can see the spinners of the German planes, the blur of their propellers. He is staring death right in the eye, with nothing but a few feet of empty air between him and the 20-millimeter shells.
That Had it been low on the shells. The chicken, son, keep some legends speaking of second gas, some say. A man, son, and drink at the slamming with a raw shapes. Crack, crack, shells, stitch a line of holes across the top of the cockpit, shattering the remaining glass overhead. Shards of plexiglass rain down on the pilots.
One shell strikes the back of Delancey's seat, the armor plate saving his life but sending a jarring shock through his spine. Then a miracle. The German pilots, seeing the gaping, hollowed-out front of the B-17, pull away prematurely. Perhaps they think the plane is already a ghost ship, or perhaps the sight of a bomber flying without a face is too unnerving even for the veterans of the Luftwaffe. They brake left and right, their tracers fading into the gray overcast.
They're gone.
The tail gunner pants over the radio. They're breaking off, but the relief is short-lived. The lovely Julie is losing altitude fast. They are down to 10,000 feet. The air is warmer, but the ground is coming up to meet them. They are still over enemy territory, and the miracle is running out of time.
Ray, look.
Delancey says, pointing a shaking finger toward the horizon. Through the haze and the swirling debris, a silver ribbon appears in the distance.
The English Channel. We're going to make the water.
Ledoux gasps, his voice cracking.
Larry, we might actually make the water.
But making the water is one thing. Landing a plane with no nose, shredded cables, and 3 engines is another entirely. Delancey looks at his hands. They are shaking so hard he can barely grip the yoke. He looks at Ledoux, whose arms are locked in a permanent muscular spasm.
10 minutes.
Delancey mutters, checking his watch.
It has been exactly 10 minutes since the shell hit. 10 minutes of holding a dead giant in the air by sheer willpower. Tell the boys to prep for ditching.
Delancey orders.
If we hit the drink, this thing is going to sink like a stone.
The frail descent. The silver ribbon of the English Channel widens. But for the crew of the lovely Julie, it looks less like a sanctuary and more like a cold, watery grave. At 8,000 feet, the B-17 is a screaming, vibrating wreck. Without the nose to streamline the air, the wind resistance is acting like a giant brake, dragging the airframe toward the whitecaps below.
Larry, the vibration, it's getting worse. Ledoux grunts. His knuckles are white, his fingers locked around the elevator cables in a permanent claw-like grip. The bulkhead, it's buckling.
Delancey looks down. The structural ribs surrounding the cockpit are groaning under the immense pressure of the ram air. Every gust of wind at this lower altitude threatens to peel the cockpit floor right out from under their seats. If the floor goes, they go with it, falling into the frigid depths of the channel while still strapped to their chairs.
Radio check. Anyone on the air? Delancey shout.
A faint, static choke voice crackles in his headset. It's an emergency frequency from a Royal Air Force aft station on the English coast.
Unknown aircraft, this is Manston Tower. We have you on radar. You are low and slow. State your condition.
Delancey lets out a breath that is half laugh, half sob. Manston, this is lovely Julie, 398th Bomb Group. We've had a bit of a mishap. Our nose is gone. Repeat, we have no nose section. Controls are manual, and I mean manual. We need a clear strip, and every fire truck you've got. There is a long, stunned silence from the tower. Understood, Julie. We're clearing runway 10. Can you maintain altitude?
Delancey replies, fighting a sudden downdraft that sends the bomber into a sickening lurch. We're coming in hot and heavy. Tell the boys to get ready.
They cross the coastline. The green fields of England appear beneath the mist. It should be a moment of triumph, but the hardest part is yet to come. A B-17 is designed to land with a balanced center of gravity. With the weight of the nose, the navigator's gear, and the bombardier's equipment missing, the plane is tail-heavy and dangerously unstable. Ledoux reaches for the lever. Clunk. Only the left main gear locks into place. The right gear is jammed, likely damaged by the same flak burst that claimed the nose. We're going to have to land on one wheel and the tail, Ledoux says. His voice remarkably calm now that the end is in sight. She's going to want the ground loop the second we touch. I'll handle the brakes, Delancey says. You just hold those cables, don't let go until we stop sliding. If you let go, the tail hits and we'll flip. The runway at Manston looms ahead. A narrow strip of gray surrounded by the flashing red lights of emergency vehicles. The crew in the back has moved to the radio room, bracing themselves in the crash position, huddled together for warmth and survival.
500 feet. Ledoux calls out. 400. Watch the airspeed, Larry. She's stalling.
The lovely Julie is no longer flying. She is falling with style. The wind howling through the open front of the plane creates a deafening roar that drowns out the engines. Delancey stares through the shattered windscreen, aiming the jagged stump of his aircraft at the center line of the runway.
This is a speech away. The way one car the Mustang of the car.
The left tire screams as it meets the tarmac. The bomber jolts violently. For a second, the right wing dips, the metal wingtip sparking against the runway like a giant flint. Delancey stomps on the left brake, trying to keep the plane from spinning out of control. Ledoux is screaming now, putting every last ounce of his strength into the cables to keep the nose, or the ghost of it, from slamming into the ground. The lovely Julie skids down the runway, a terrifying spectacle of sparks, smoke, and screaming metal. She veers off the tarmac and into the grass, the mud slowing her down as she plows a deep furrow into the English soil. With one final, shuddering groan, the B-17 comes to a halt. The silence that follows is absolute. The engines are dead. The wind has stopped. For nearly a minute, nobody moves. Then slowly, Larry Delancey unbuckles his harness. He looks over at Ledoux. The co-pilot's hands are still clamped onto the steel cables. It takes Delancey several seconds to pry Ledoux's frozen, bleeding fingers away from the metal. They climb out of the side hatch and drop onto the grass. They turn back to look at their plane. From the cockpit forward, there is simply nothing. A clean, jagged break as if a giant had bitten the front off the aircraft. It seems impossible that such a thing could fly for 10 seconds, let alone 10 minutes of combat and a channel crossing. Ground crews and medics sprint toward them, but the men of the lovely Julie just stand there in the mud, shivering in their shredded flight suit. They look at each other, 10 men who had stared into the void and refused to blink. The miracle of the noseless fort was over. The legend was just beginning.